Thanks, Theo. Yeah, it's great to. I mean, I wish I was there in person, but it's great to be still connected with South Africa and still chatting to people. I still have some close colleagues and friends that I'm in contact with, and notably this album. I mean, the album was released already last year, and it features Carlo Mombelli and Jono Sweetman, who I've got a long-standing working relationship with, and then also it features a wonderful new composer who you should all watch out for, a young Wits graduate. His name's Nick Horston, or Nicholas Horston. He did all the string writing and working on that. So yeah, exciting young person to watch out for. But really what I wanted to talk to you about today is, I mean, I'm showing just three snippets this evening from the two different performances of Inhale we've given. We gave one in Liverpool as the launch, and then we gave another in Johannesburg as part of the Concerts SA Royal Norwegian Embassy concert series in January. There's just three works recorded from there. You'll see the works are interesting, and they kind of represent a kind of compositional departure or a new endpoint for me, and I'm kind of still exploring that. So the videos are of Inhale live. The thing I'm going to talk to you about today, or share with you a little bit about today, is I suppose kind of a little bit more unacademic. So I'm going to kind of muse, which is unacademically, at a conference, on some of the kind of experiences that have shaped the kind of approach that you'll find in Inhale. So anyway, yeah, it's immigrated, and Inhale really emerges out of some kind of realization, self-reflection, or epiphanies that I noted and experienced in a really kind of tactile way here in the UK since relocating from Johannesburg. But also, it came out of the fact that when I arrived in the UK in January of 2021, I had this weird experience of changing territories physically, but I was still working for Johannesburg, albeit remotely. And all of this, thanks to the glorious COVID. So added to this, there was still a infamous period of lockdown in the UK, and my non-working hours then were dedicated to exploring the UK, albeit virtually. And during this process, there were a great many musical discoveries that have dynamically kind of changed my outlook. One of my first discoveries was this guy. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. He's a classical guitarist, Sean Shibe. He's a younger generation guitarist. He comes out of Edinburgh, and he's multi-release. And I stumbled across Sean by chance. I was watching a live broadcast of a new work for strings and guitar, which was premiered in a live stream from the Barbican during lockdown. As it was still presented under lockdown, the work itself was presented on old cassette players. Let's see the video play in the background. It was a work for strings and an electric guitar, and as you see, the Shibe, the string parts were pre-recorded on the cassettes, and he timed and played the cassettes back. Anyway, so then the soloist takes his role in the central part of the stage, and actually the most impactful part of discovering this work or this guitarist was then the subsequent rabbit hole of exploring his more broader interesting work. In this piece, you can see he's playing electric guitar, but as I found out, I found him playing noise works with graphic scores. Found a wonderful rendition of him playing Steve Reich's electric counterpoint for guitar, the work that was originally composed for Pat Metheny. And then later his incredible renditions of Bach on the classical guitar. Recently, I also went to a performance of his with the Manchester Collective, and where he was performing new commissioned works for both classical guitar and electric guitar with string quartet from the Manchester Collective. So why share with you this? Well, in my young experience as a classical guitarist, when I started some 40 years ago, in my experience as a young classical guitarist, it was really frowned upon to play the electric guitar, even if you did it in secret. But here, for Shibe and many of the other classical guitarists around now in here, such as the young guitarist Colin McCready, there are no longer these kind of myopic class distinctions or genre distinctions or genre limitations. They, maybe they're no longer bound to them, or perhaps maybe they don't even remember them. Then emerging immediately from lockdown, the first thing I did was I hit the local record store and I discovered this album here. It's called Playground in the Lake. It's by electronic music artist Clark. I'm sure some of you who are familiar with him. And he's on the Warp Records label. And his music he's known for this kind of stripped down, stark, minimal techno. And then in his early period, and then gradually moving into more kind of dense fields of sound, but and also famously this kind of bent microtonal pitch movements which he gets from LFOs. If you're interested in what the album that precedes this, his 2017 album Death Peak, is this kind of stark, heavy, minimal techno album. But anyway, here I went into the record store and I'm in the classical section and I pick up this Deutsche Grammophon on the bastion of classical recordings. Here's this release, thinking, what the flip is Clark doing on this album? The albums for strings, electronics, and even harpsichord and bit of voice, they're all presented, but all the instruments and the sound is presented in Clark's kind of signature compositional style, and they're pretty darn amazing. And shortly after this, he launched the album with the London Contemporary Orchestra, and I was fortunate to catch that as well. So this album is interesting to me because it's a synthesis of the acoustic and the electronic in a way that's really purely in service of the musical design from the outset. They're bound together in an interwoven way in the composition. So Clark's this minimal techno compositional style emerges from is present even in his first album, Clarence Park. But this album is really no Clark with strings. Sadly, by the way, Deutsche Grammophon at the same time did a really horrible Moby with strings album, which is pretty much exactly what I'm thinking this is avoiding. But Clark's album draws this new things together in new ways, kind of unfettered by the boundaries or concerns or limitations of style or genre classification. The orchestral writing and the synths and stuff are kind of at times kind of indistinguishable. You can't really hear what's making what, but all throughout this faltering sense of pitch in Clark's work is coming through. So I'm 47, so you could say that this is an intentional avoidance of hooked on classics, but maybe there's nothing left to avoid. Maybe the field is completely and utterly open. Another artist that's really inspired me of late is this Anna Meredith. She's a Scottish composer. She's written for the BBC Proms, etc., as well as string quartets. I discovered her by stumbling across down a Spotify rabbit hole, stumbling across a remake of Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which she did for the Scottish National Ballet, and subsequently her album Varmints, and then the Mercury Award-winning album Fibs, which you can see the launch of, or the orchestral launch of here. So for me, as someone who's worked in rock, jazz, classical, across different genres, her band per se really defies logic. There's this intense electronic dance music that comes out, but the band is made of voice, cello, clarinet, live drums. The drummer, who happens to be part of the London Contemporary Orchestra, is their principal percussionist, and he's with the Riot Ensemble as well, and electric guitar, and all these meld in with Ableton. Okay, but the thing that grabbed me the most was the first video I saw. All of the big synth techno bass lines in her music are coming from tuba, being played by a tuba player. So she's like this joyful composer, like filled with humor. A recent album as well is called 21 Studies for Bumper Cars, which is like fairground bumper cars, which she's tracked and then made into music. And interesting as well, she's also written for Tom Kirsten's G Plus Guitar Plus Ensemble, a classical guitar work. So anyway, why all this waffling about other artists today? Surely isn't the idea of a conference presentation either to talk about yourself or to I don't know, use big words or whatever. Why all this talk for me today? For me, it's about this idea of crossing from acoustic to classical or from electronic to contemporary. Maybe my point really is here that all music is electronic now. You can't get away from it. But what do I mean by that? So I think to talk of me or to talk of you making electronic music requires us intellectually to set something up as being non-electronic. And so to pursue a type of discourse like that, in my mind, requires an othering, a binary, and usually one that can come with some sort of pejorative sense of othering. And this could be before, for or against the electronic, for the acoustic, against it, whatever, taking one or other side. This could be for the complex or against the simplistic, whether you're admiring the complexity of one great piece of music, electronic or not, or denigrating something like Max Richter or Olafur Arnolds just for being popular. I mean, how dare they? Othering is kind of, in my mind, an overused tool. We know all these kinds of otherings really well, and some may have faded now in our own minds, like the ones about serious music versus popular or jazz. Or what about serious composers versus improvisers? Or even further down the line, serious jazz improvisers versus those that pursue free improvisation. This kind of othering is present with us. And so we make statements about ourselves often, or at least I was always encouraged to as a young musician, such as, I am a, in brackets, insert self-validating type of category here, close brackets, musician. But I think William Gibson's point here on the screen can help us. Just see through this for a moment. Gibson's saying the future is here, and we are assuming the future here is a positive moment, but it just isn't equally distributed amongst us. And in my observations and explorations, the future is cropping up in interesting ways, in interesting artists, and in the most interesting and unsuspecting places, whether it's Sean Shibe on the classical guitar or Clark with an orchestra. I mean, realistically, for me, in the 2020s, who would have imagined the types of innovations as what Sean Shibe is presenting on the classical guitar? When I grew up, that would have been heresy. And yes, you might think of all these artists that they suck, or you might, that they must be judged in some way for doing the things they're doing. But I share them with you in my mind, not to convince you of whether you should like them or not, but to present as a creative set of possibilities whereby music technologies, as the control mechanisms of electronic music, have blurred into the acoustic, and in new ways they kind of smear across sound, they smear across presentation practice, even traditional rock band lineups and instrumentation, and they kind of are leaving the idea of genre fading in the rearview mirror. So is it possible not to make electronic music anymore? I don't know, but our challenge may be the term electronic. Electronics are just one technology. Technologies excite us. They push us forwards into realities in ways that excite but don't threaten. For example, the latest iPhone, and designers and marketers know these boundaries well. But we also fear things that are exotic and beyond our understanding that scare us, such as Big Bad Cyborg or the LLM or ChatGPT. Here's a great guy that prods at this, and one of my favorites. I love Stellark because through his art, he causes us to confront the very question. He's effectively asking us, what are we afraid of? Oh, sorry, one early. By presenting, Stellark presents the work at the bare-knuckled intersection of the human and electronic. The technological and artistic realities Stellark forces us to acknowledge are that all human practice is technological, and our anxieties are about control and becoming obsolete. In his work, he often gives his own body over and away, and through electronic means, suspensions or even surgery, and this foregrounds a sense of threat or obsolescence in an artistic setting. The loss of control and starkness of his work is not the focus. He forces us to confront what is already here, agreeing with Gibson that the future is already here, but for Stellark, maybe you just don't always see it. So here's little 9-year-old Jonathan with a dodgy piece of technology, a classical guitar. I've had this since I was 6. My hands are deformed from it. My pelvis has grown skewed from it thanks to using the footstool so early. It's an extension of me and it's indistinguishable. And there's a fire alarm. Sorry about that. But the classical guitar, this piece of wooden technology in that iteration, which is less than 100 years old at the time of my taking it up, controlled me for the most of my life. It defined what was good music. It defined what was bad. It made my own love of heavy metal my dirty little secret, which I hid from families and music teachers. It prohibited me, at least till my 20s, from improvising. It was a closed field of exploration, a technology that closed the field of exploration in my musical life, narrowing my outlook. Yes, it was a technology. Yes, it extended me. No, it wasn't electrical, but it did exert threat and control in the way that Stellar kind of highlights. So all music making requires technology. Some of these are electronic, digital music software packages. What about notation packages? Those are not benign electronic music events. All instruments, electronic or not, are technological. A violin is a prosthesis in the Stellar sense. All humans engage continually with technology. So what has inspired my recent work in this sense is that the playing field is larger. It's embracing all without judgment, and that these new and creative possibilities have opened up, leveling the playing field where there's no longer a need to separate categories. Things are flowing between each other with ease. And that's what I got to share with you today.
Jonathan, we're back live. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was most stimulating. I would like to open up the floor and provide an opportunity for questions, or shall I pose the first question? I'll go and then invite the next question to the podium. You've spoken very eloquently, in my mind, about the migration between technologies and how, in your case, as a composer-performer, you very adroitly, in an elegant way, disregard any boundaries between the tools that you are using to compose, to perform, etc. And I was thinking, yeah, we shouldn't be talking about this, but what about cultural borders, the crossing between, stylistic borders in the creative process, in the process of composition? Now, I realize this is a very hot topic, and we can spend quite a lot of time sort of philosophizing about this, but I'm interested in this point because of the fact that you spent your formative years in Joburg in South Africa, and now you've basically, you've been planted into a perhaps slightly foreign surroundings. So stylistically speaking, from a composer's point of view, what are your thoughts about crossing cultural boundaries?
Wow. Okay, that is a hot topic. I guess everyone's wrestling with this topic now, and at Liverpool University, I'm on the EDI committee as well. So we're dealing with even that stuff locally. I mean, Liverpool as a city has a very complex cultural history. There's a great organization that I've worked with there called MyLab, which is pursuing traditional music from the Indian diaspora, and then we're looking at ways of getting interface, because those communities tend to exist separated. But I think I think the easiest way probably to answer, to refer to your question in a constructive way, is to tell you about a course that I've been running now at Liverpool, which is, I picked up, even at that university, there's a division between music technology, popular music, and classical, as the three specializations, and never shall they mix. There's no flow between them. So I designed and developed, with their support, this kind of course that tries to, or has by its outcomes, assessment methods, and entry points, created ways for the free flow between the degrees. So there's kind of equal registration, or somewhat equal registration, between the three different degree programs. And I can say that adopting that kind of approach, whilst it seemed obvious to me to address the problem, isn't obvious to colleagues over here. And I think that is maybe something that comes from back home. Like, we are confronted with such diversity on a continual basis, and also, like you say, it is a hot and difficult topic to deal with. But I do think that dealing with it is vital, and it's better to, in my mind, to stumble along the way through these things, in the pursuit of success, than to do to become a victim of cancel culture and to hide away in a corner.
Thank you so much. We have William Fourie as guest, and I'd like to invite him to the microphone.
sorry, Jonathan, just taking a sprint across the room. Lovely to see you, by the way, and I hope all is going well there. It sounds like you're up to really, really interesting stuff.
Cool.
First of all, great reference to Sean Cheever. I kind of was in the London moment, I guess, when he was really emerging, doing some concerts at Wigmore, just before the big Barbican concert. And so he was like sort of a mate of a mate of a mate, and we all hang out at the pub together. But I remember also being particularly struck as a guitarist myself, or former guitarist at least, seeing a concert of his at Wigmore Hall where like Footstool comes out, or no, he's got a little triangle thingy going, like totally classical and sort of dressed quite classical and, you know, all this type of stuff. And then there's like a pause and he whips out an electric guitar and just blows our minds in a totally different way. And me being really shocked and telling my mates around me like, oh, wow, you know, did he actually just do that? And they all just turned around and said, yeah, of course he did that, because as guitarists, that's like what we do. And so I think there is a slightly longer culture of that kind of trans-genre work being done in that space, particularly because my sense was that curricula there tend to focus on the idea of musicianship above genre kind of entrenchment. And I was wondering if you could speak perhaps to that concept of musicianship. Like, is that the direction that you're kind of moving in towards? Is it a term that has any kind of resonance with the type of work that you're doing across cultural borders, maybe? Thinking about musicians not just as masters of technology, like Starlock would kind of tell us, but actually musicians as kind of integrated being with whom this musical process is kind of unfolding the whole time, irrespective of what machine you're holding in your hand. I don't know, just some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting to hear you speak, because I think, you know, we carry a lot of those kind of stark boundaries. We were kind of indoctrinated with them, I think, and I mean, I honestly still wrestle with them, you know, but like seeing Sean and that doing that, you know, it's like you're right when you speak to people afterwards. Like, of course, people are doing this, but you know, people do observe some of the histories, and they're linked to the instrument. I saw this Colin McCready gig last week at the Bath Guitars Festival, and so he was playing Renaissance work. So then he turned up the classical guitar, you know, with the A-frame and played straight ahead like that. And then he was playing a Pat Metheny piece, and he assumed the Pat Metheny position almost, the way he holds the guitar. And so it's almost like there's a recognition of the link between these physical things and the musical output. But personally, I still think I'm still on a journey. I haven't quite figured out how to glue all the things together, and I don't feel I'm alone. I've got a duet partner, a guy called John Bailey, a guitarist, and he's got a death metal band and plays classical guitar. So it's like, so but he's also like, how does one move between these so freely? I think there's a real art to it. So in my own courses, I'm not teaching musicianship or performance. I'm teaching composition and hardware hacking and hyper instrument work and things like that. But in those, we're trying to explore what is a course like, you know, what does a university composition course look like without genre? And that's pretty tough. You know, it's challenging for the students, and it's challenging just to get examiners to come in and hear one thing that's a heavy metal piece, and then in the same concert, the next student does a classical work, and the next, you know, it's a challenge, but I think it's worth it.
Thank you.
Cameron? I think you're going to recognize our next guest.
Hello.
Hello.
My principal reason for asking this question is so that you don't tell me off for not asking a question.
Oh, well, you can go sit down now.
No, but just to take this a bit further from what you were saying, and just to kind of out you as someone who is an incredible absorber of and person who applies style really specifically and with great articulation. When we look at a a future, because obviously, I mean, we've worked together a lot, and I completely agree with everything you've said about these divisions between style being really harmful and causing both social barriers and artistic barriers across the world of music, and we see it in a lot of places. But the irony, of course, is in order to be able to mold and use and bring stuff together, you have to know the stuff. You have to know the technique of the styles and genres you're using. You have to know the background. You have to, one thing that I always wonder about is how you're 47. I thought you were younger than me, but you're 47, not 48. That was shocking to hear. But in that time since you were 6, how you've absorbed the number of styles you have to the depth that you have to then be able to apply them. Now, in a curriculum that is always overstuffed and will continue to get increasingly difficult to fit things in, that we find, I think, in every institution and way we try and do it, how, looking 10, 15 years from now, are we going to be able to have the acuity of style? How can we teach that? How can we give the students that so that they can use that and create the kind of border crossing music that we're discussing, so that it doesn't become a kind of sludge in a way?
Yeah, I think what I've observed, I observed this both a colleague that teaches theory, and he teaches theory in this lecture room right below my office, and he loves to turn the music up really, really loud. So I get to hear every week what's going on. And then I also observed this because my son took a lesson with this amazing classical guitarist, Marco Tamayo, a couple of weeks ago, and I sat outside. He was playing a Bach cavat, and I saw the same thing happening from two people that absolutely don't know each other, one from Cuba and one from Liverpool. But in both instances, the information that was trying to be conveyed in the theory class, it's theory, and in this guitar lesson, it's something about Bach. The use of intentional use of unrelated genre and period unrelated music. So like in Richard Worth's class, the theory class, you'll hear, I'm not sure what he'll be doing, but he'll be doing one theoretical thing, and you'll hear a bit of Frank Zappa followed by, I don't know, Domi and J.D. Beck, followed by John Coltrane, then Bach, then a bit of Schubert, and then it's just anything goes to illustrate the point. And so the music itself is no longer, is no longer what's so important. It's not about to learn about the period or whatever. It's about to learn what the mechanics of the music are and how to convey that to students. So we find then the students are coming out with mechanics a lot quicker because inevitably they find something in that smorgasbord of stuff that they latch onto without having to convince them to listen to, say, I don't know, Villa-Lobos. You don't have to convince the guitarist to listen to Villa-Lobos. You show them the method, and then they realize, oh, okay, bossa nova is the same as Villa-Lobos. So that's happening. And then the same thing happened with my son. We had this thing on Bach, and I was listening outside the door, and I heard he's playing Lionel Richie, and then he was playing The Police, and then he was playing Bach again. Then he had my son play Bach on top of Lionel Richie, and he was singing, and I was like, okay. So I think that's one vehicle that we can use to make sure at the end of the day that we land the mechanics. That's, really, I think that's really, really important, as opposed to the canon. At the end of the day, if the students twig onto the canon, they'll go chase it themselves.
Cameron is satisfied. There are no more questions from the audience. If I may add my 2 pennies worth, I think creativity and craftsmanship are important elements for me. Craftsmanship, whether you have the facility, the ability to write a fugue or to play a riff, remains, it's a skill set, and I think attention to detail in terms of craftsmanship will save composition in the future, if you want to put it that way.
For sure.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And if there's any possibility of you coming down to Cape Town, please make UCT your first port of call. Thanks so much.
Thanks.